What's going on, everyone? I'm Mekkah, and you're watching my Fire Emblem 8 100% growth slow turn count playthrough on Ephraim's route, also known as a board RNGod plays FE8. Chapter 10 is a kill boss slash defend chapter, and it's pretty easy to guess which one of these objectives is easier to fulfill, especially when you have a Vanessa as ridiculous as mine. Everyone else is just getting some XP, getting a village we don't need, and making sure Archer gets his heals in, and that's about it. That's all they really need to do. Tana needs to follow Vanessa to recruit Cormag, the wyvern rider that's in the bottom right of the map. Usually he doesn't start moving towards you until later on in the chapter, but if you put someone in his attacking range, then he will fly up to them, and that way we can put him in recruit range. This chapter is another reason why Tana is kind of tough to train on Ephraim route, because she's so busy fulfilling these objectives that she's not near any enemies at all. Cormag is a pretty nice unit. His stats are good enough to the point where we can train him to be good. He's not amazing, he needs some help to get doubling, he has low resistance. His accuracy with javelins leaves something to be desired, and he needs to get to level 10 to promote like everyone else. But he's still a really important unit for the Ephraim route exclusive chapters. And of course, it's complete recruitment, so we recruit him regardless of whether he was or not. The fact that he survives an attack by Vanessa is probably evidence enough of how strong he is. The other recruitable unit in this chapter is Dusel, the green Great Knight in the bottom left of the map. He's pretty good for casual playthroughs, but in this playthrough he does absolutely nothing. Even though his combat stats are pretty good, he has just enough speed to double and a lot of strength and the ability to use just about any physical weapon. But 6 move is 6 move, bad terrain penalties are bad terrain penalties, so unfortunately he is pretty useless. The boss of the chapter is pretty tough actually. He has like a full arsenal of different weapons he can use, among which are a longbow and a lance reaver. He starts equipped with the lance reaver, which makes it pretty hard to hit him with Vanessa using a regular weapon. But one of the enemies last chapter dropped an axe reaver, and that actually makes it fairly easy to dispose of him as long as Vanessa can double. Vanessa can kill with either a double crit or a pierce crit, or some kind of combination of that. Unfortunately, because Vanessa is level 1, when she fights him, she only has a 1% chance to pierce, so it's much easier to rig a double crit, especially since the Axe Reaver has a bit of innate critical. As I said, the village is pretty useless, it's just a torch staff, which we can already buy at this point, and there's plenty of gold to go around. Not infinite, but as long as you're not wasting it, there's no real need for it. But nonetheless, it's nice to have another torch staff. We do need those next chapter. Funny thing is, because Cormac got ravaged by Vanessa, I actually had to rig him to dodge this Luna. The way the RN seeds worked out at first, he was going to get hit and die. Which is funny, because Luna is pretty inaccurate. But yeah, kind of a gross boss kill, not the hardest ever, but it does take a little bit of rigging. In general, you'll find the amount of rigging in this playthrough goes down quite a bit. Now that we have very reliable combat units, but sometimes, especially for boss kills, it's still necessary. So yeah, that wraps up Chapter 10 in 2 turns. Let's move straight on to the preparations for Chapter 11. Yeah, Chapter 11. Let's go. So before we dive into the next chapter, we got a little bit of prepping to do. Cormag needs to get the speed wings. His speed is good enough to where in a casual playthrough he will eventually start doubling, but I need him to start doubling ASAP. There's just not much time, and the speed wings will get him to just the right level of speed to where he can start round KOing most enemies, because his base strength is actually pretty good, and he has a killer lance if he needs more attack, so for the most part Cormag is usable at base, which is good because he needs to pull a lot of work in this chapter. So Phantom Ship is a Fog of War route map, 2 characteristics that a lot of people don't like. And casual players have a lot of trouble on this map because of the high enemy density. My problem is actually the opposite. There's not enough enemies nearby to kill at first, and I want to start killing as soon as possible. For LTC players, this chapter is notorious for trying to stall and trying to make you wait for reinforcements that you just want to face as soon as possible. Basically every turn there's going to be more enemies for a player to face. It takes like 2 turns for a ship to arrive with a bunch of monsters on it. And only at that point can foot units really start doing anything. And there's also some enemies hidden in the fog and appearing in coordinates as reinforcements. And they actually have really weird AI that stops them from attacking you even if you're right next to them sometimes. So routing this chapter is a bit of a pain, and you need the help of all of your flyers to do it as soon as possible. But I do send out Cormag and Vanessa to get the early jump on some enemies that I can kill early on. And then as the chapter goes on, they will find the hardest targets to reach for our foot units. And our foot units will take care of the enemies near the ship. Because there's still a lot of them. You can use this trick with Tana that they did here in a casual playthrough to get ahead of schedule a little bit, if you know what I mean. She's going to drop Kyle on the ship, and Kyle is going to just stomp through a bunch of these really weak enemies. Because most of the enemies on the ship are weak zombies and skeletons, and some promoted enemies, but not that many. I'm also kind of happy that this is a Fog of War map once again, and it lasts for quite a bit actually. So that means a lot of staff EXP for Arthur and Mulder. I didn't bring Natasha for this one because I needed all the other slots. And at this point I already knew that Natasha wasn't really going anywhere, so you probably won't be seeing much of her from now on. I didn't even put her in the unit overview, just for that reason. So this is where Kyle is going to get most of his EXP and turn from a Scrub Cavalier into an actual viable unit. He actually gets more EXP than he needs to promote, but I had to dump someone on the ship and he's a good recipient of EXP. Other candidates would have been Ross or Seth. They also need to get some EXP. In my previous run, I actually promoted Ford at the start of this chapter. But even when promoted, even with a lot of levels from 100% growths, Ford was still disappointing me in some levels, while Cal's stats are just good enough to where he does what I need him to do in the upcoming chapters once promoted. Now what else is there to say about this chapter? It takes 4 turns to beat it in the lowest turn count. Horus actually managed to do this. But there are 2 recruitable characters, La Rochelle and Dazla. Yes, that's how you pronounce it. Heroes confirmed it. But La Rochelle and Dazla only appear on turn 5. And even though the game dialogue, like the story, pretends that they joined you if you beat the chapter more quickly, the fact is that they don't join your roster unless you wait until turn 5 to beat the chapter. So, because this playthrough is all-inclusive, full recruitment, I have no choice but to wait for turn 5. And this is actually the only instance in the whole game where I lose turns to having to recruit units. Other than this chapter, the game is pretty kind and will almost always give you your recruitable units, even if they're like green at the end of the map. And the same is the case here. I don't have to wait. I do have to wait. I don't have to talk to them in order to recruit them. I just need them to be on the map. But this is nice because it gives me more torch EXP, so I'm fine with it. This is where the planks start appearing. This is when most players start to get into the action. If you didn't do what I did and dump someone on the ship to clear a bunch of enemies in advance, then this chapter understandably gets pretty hard because of the large enemy density. You can imagine that someone would have to like stand on the ship and take on a bunch of enemies, and then also face enemies coming from the north and the south. Like there's a bunch of eyeballs and gargoyles flying in and doing even more chip damage. This chapter is also where using someone like Joshua, who can only really attack effectively at one range and not use like javelins or hand axes, they start to become a real liability because there's just so many ranged enemies, and every turn that you're not clearing these out, they're just going to have another enemy phase where they keep chipping away at your units. And that's probably the cause of why a lot of people recommend newer players to just undeploy most of your weak units and only use Seth, Ephraim, and Dusel. But I'm totally fine. None of these enemies are a real threat to me right now. The only real problem is trying to figure out where to put my units so that they all get countered. There's a lot of enemies, in fact, on the ship that don't move but do attack, like some of the ranged enemies. So I'm trying to put people in attacking range. And there's also some coming from below the deck from the stairs as reinforcements. I thought that was kind of cute. Another good place for Ross to get a bunch of level ups. I rescued him on turn 1 so I could drop him pretty far in on turn 2. I'm going to give him the kill on the promoted zombie, the Entombed I think they're called. They give like 100 EXP, so that's really nice for Ross. He does have his promotion item ready, so I actually want him to get to level 10 as soon as possible, but it's not easy when you have 5 move. Sad as it is. Tana actually puts in real worker against the eyeballs. They are so bad AS-wise that she can double with an Iron Lance. Unfortunately, she cannot double with a Javelin, so she cannot counter them on enemy phase. and kill them in one turn. Although I think there was an opportunity to give her a bit more EXP than I did. And in retrospect, I think I would have liked to do it to make the future kills I do with her a bit more reliable. There's actually no real rigging in this chapter from what I remember. It's also enemy phase focused, and the enemies are for the most part pretty weak, and the ones that I cannot one round KO, I have 2 rounds to kill. There's like one instance of Cormac having to get a killer lance crit, and that's about it. Cormac is really the hardest person to get kills with in this chapter, because the eyeballs do quite a bit of damage on him, and funnily enough, I left my only pure water on Erica before the route split ended. Erica had to use the pure water to survive in chapter 8, and I don't know if it was even possible, but I should have traded it off her after she used it. But I didn't, and as a result I don't have access to any because you cannot buy them at this point in the game. And giving Cormac and Tana pure water is nice in general for this chapter if you're playing it casually. But in my case it meant I just had to use vulneraries a lot. Here's Cal's promotion finally, and he leaves Ford all alone in the Cavalier Scrub squad. Cal is not as good as Franz stat-wise, but he comes pretty close, especially since he got one more level up. Franz hasn't developed all that much ever since he was been promoted. I think he hit level 2 in Fort Rigwald, and obviously he didn't get all that much done in the chapter after that, so they're pretty close. But Franz is still a little bit better, I believe. Doesn't matter, they're both pretty useful. For what it's worth, Franz is not going to reach S-rank lances, and Kyle isn't either. So yeah, pretty long enemy phases. I'm pretty sure you probably haven't heard the enemy phase music go on for this long. I think especially the last few enemy phases are really long, but what can you do about it? It's a route chapter. I chose not to speed it up when recording because I actually think speeding up sounds a little bit ugly, and I only wanted to do it for long RN burns. But for an enemy phase, I don't know, I think there's something satisfying about watching these enemy phases in a way, honestly. Because the level ups are so delicious and everyone is just so good at killing things. But it does feel a little bit like Radiant Dawn Part 4 sometimes. Really happy about the Torch being so good in this game, honestly, the Torch staff. I don't think I would have been able to get a rank of Warp on Archer without the Torch staff. So this is the part where most people probably shit their pants, is when the Gargoyle boss appears. That guy is pretty fast, I think he has like 14 or 15 speed. And in fact, even for my units, he's pretty tough to kill. I know Archer doesn't double him, so I have Vanessa go up against him. I think it might actually be possible to block him from spawning if you put someone on his spot, or at the very least you can block some of the reinforcements. Not all of them, some of them fly in and some of them just appear on the map. The ones that appear you can block if you put someone on there, kind of like how if you stand on a fort where an enemy reinforcement comes from, you can just block that. And I think that's the case with the Gargoyle boss, but I'm not 100% sure. I should probably check it and then edit the wiki just to show. So yeah, this is where you can see Cormac's durability needs a little bit of help, but I do have the resources available to help him, so it's all good. Archer gets a little bit of EXP, which is nice. He does need to not just get a good staff rank, but he also needs to get a lot of magic to warp someone far enough. And you might be curious why I turned Archer into a Bishop instead of a Sage. Sage has a D rank in staves, while Bishop has a C, and there's not enough turns to get Archer to A if he starts at D once promoted. Rengar actually tried this out. When we both did a test route, I went Bishop and he went Sage just as an experiment, and it turned out that yeah, you need to go Bishop unless you don't want to make it to A in time for chapter 16. Which is unfortunate because Sage has a higher magic cap, so if you do manage to get Archer to A rank, I think there's possibilities for like getting a lower turn count in at least 2 chapters. But unfortunately this is not possible in Ephraim's route. If you're low turn counting Erica route, then you can actually do Sage Archer and get A rank in staves in time. And that's really nice. But yeah, I'm just rambling on because there's not a whole lot to talk about for this chapter. I kind of make it look easy because of how overpowered my units are, but don't worry, I too can have trouble with this chapter sometimes if I'm being careless. There's just so many enemies, and a lot of them are invisible at points. And you really gotta make sure to have 2 range equipped at all time, or you just get screwed over by the many ranged enemies. But just use pure water, use high defense units, and you'll be fine. Also use the choke points to your advantage. And also be ready for the boss, because that guy is strong, dude. Like, Vanessa didn't one-round him. Maybe at some point I might upload like a 4-turn clear. I think you also need Ross if you want to get a 4-turn clear. Just to put him in one of the corners where the non-attacking enemies spawn. So yeah, Chapter 12, 5 turns. Thanks for watching.